research and teaching, and then doing art. And the art, I got, let's just see it. Okay. This is, I did art. This is painting and so on, which I still do. And then in Baltimore.
Mic turned on.
Is
Is it
working,
coming
yeah.
through?
Yeah, testing. Can I, can you all?
I can't hear, so.
Okay, well, my hearing aids, I've turned them down. Anyway, in Baltimore County, continuing education, adult, I didn't have a shop, and I was able to go into the high school woodworking shops and take courses and build some furniture and do some of that. And then I got into stained glass. And looking back now on stained glass, I see a connection between stained glass and segmented wood turning. This is like segmented glass turning, but you're putting segments, some precisely cut segments together in either two-dimensional or three-dimensional. So I think that kind of led me up to doing segmented wood turning. And about 15 years ago, when I saw retirement on the near horizon, I thought, well, what do I want to be doing? So I went to a couple of woodworking shows and there's a wonderful book, Ray Allen, he was a pioneer in segmented wood turning. And that kind of got me interested in it. And then Malcolm Tibbetts, who's still one of the top turners now. I learned so much from this. And Kurt Theobald, again. So this really got me motivated. So I talked my wife into letting me turn our garage into a woodworking shop for 9 months out of the year. And then bought a lathe and everything. So that is kind of how I got into segmented wood turning. So what I want to do now for the next hour or so is teach you, for those of you who don't do it, but for the rest of you, just take a nap. Segmented wood turning 101. So this will be a course. No exam, no test in here. But you all will pass, I promise. In fact, what I'll be doing, I have pieces up here, intermediate pieces, and I'll be passing them around. And maybe if we can kind of get everybody up in the, well, it's pretty full. I'll pass pieces around, and there's a table back here, and just pile them up when they get through. So, okay, segmented wood turning. Okay. Why do segmented wood turning? Well, how does it? Okay, hello, testing. Okay. How does it compare to turning a log? Well, if you take a log, you take a piece of wood, like that, and you put it on the lathe, and you kind of imagine, well, what do I want to? I want a vase, a bowl, a platter. Put it on there, turn it, and after you've taken 90% of the wood out into shavings on the floor, you look at it and you've got the shape, you've got the features of the wood that are being revealed, the color, the texture, and the figure in it, and you're dependent on the piece of wood. Segmented wood turning, a little bit different, more like building furniture. You're taking a lot of little pieces, putting them together into a larger creativity. It allows for greater creativity, I think, in many different ways. Uses up a lot of small pieces. I don't know if you have a big barrel of small scrap wood like I do, but uses up small pieces, much less waste. If you take a log, you're removing 90% of it, turning it into uh, sawdust and scrapings, but with this, it's like 10% waste, if that. You can combine multiple species of wood, like we've seen this evening. So multiple species can be put together for contrast and so on. No end grain turning. I have a problem when I'm turning a log. The end grain, you get a little bit difficult to get a nice smooth. So no end grain turning, and it can take many forms, just like you can do with the just turning a regular piece of wood. So these are some of the differences. There's one. Okay. Well, I'm sorry. Before we go any further, my best friend from childhood is a lawyer, a federal judge, and he advised me to issue the following disclaimer before we go in.
How much did he charge for? How much did he charge you for?
Oh, he's my best friend. So, he's also a woodworker. He's also a woodworker. So he said I'm living proof of this, but then on the other hand, it doesn't apply to anyone here. Yeah. So okay, what tools are required? Well, either table saw, miter saw, band saw. I use a table saw, and in fact, you spend much of your time, if not most of it, on the table saw. You need an accurate protractor, miter gauge, sander, belt sander, disc sander, glue, lots and lots of glue. I used a Tight Bond 3 or one of the other Tight Bonds. Lots of glue, so that's one of your largest things. And then there was something else, lathe. Lathe, you also need a lathe at the end. Most of your time is spent before you get on the lathe, getting it together. So, okay, come on. All right, well, what I want to do now is just go through some of the basic steps of constructing this. And these are made from a stack of rings, like here's a stack of rings that haven't been put together, but you need to construct this stack of rings. Right? And the rings, in turn, are built from segments. Segments like this, and I'll be passing these around in a moment. So there's a little terminology before we get started. Each segment is a trapezoid, and you have to determine the thickness of each segment, the length and the width of each segment as you are getting started, and the miter angle. Miter angle, there are two, one on the left, one on the right, to make each trapezoid that's going to go into forming a ring.
Is there a formula, or is there like a chart, like a certain size ring has
Yep.
so many segments?
Hang on.
Okay.
Yes.
No,
Yeah, it's okay. There are a number of software apps that are out there. If you want to do that, to design your bowl and do all of the math on it. If you're into that, that's fine. I had a software business on the side, so I've done that. But as an artist, doing it by hand, I find much more appealing and constructive. So I use graph paper, and we'll draw the plan on the graph paper and then do the calculations on that, as we're going to see in a moment. Okay, so I lay that out. So what I'm going to do, here's the one that I'm going to use to demonstrate how I do all the planning on it, and then I'll use a different one for the actual construction. So this is a Greek
Got a big leg.
Greek amphora. Yeah, I have a Nova 1624. It's not big, and I did this in parts, as you'll see later on. I have some pictures of it. That's the biggest, one of the biggest ones I've made. So what I did as I was planning this was to lay this out on graph paper. So here is the graph paper, and so I made a number of sketches ahead of time, and just this is the final sketch, the graph paper, lay out the outline, and this is what I used to do all of the calculations for this. So the first thing you need to do is to plan the number of rings, how many rings you're going to have, the thickness of each ring, and the species of each ring. Now, the wood we use, we get from a board. So if you've got a 1 by 10 inch and then 8 feet long board of maple or mahogany or whatever you're using, if it's 1 inch thick, then the thickness is going to be 1 inch. So anyway, you have to plan the number. So if I'm going to build something 20 inches tall, and I have lumber that's 1 inch thick, 20 times 1, carry the,
Do you surface the board so that they're
Oh,
actually
oh, yeah.
smooth and perfect?
Definitely, yeah. So anyway, you plan the number of rings, and here in this one, had 2 of them for the base, and then so I instead of numbering them, because there's so many numbers here, I give them letters. So this is ring A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S. So 19 rings, A through S. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so that's the ring and the thickness of the ring. So then we have to determine the maximum diameter of each ring. And the diameter is going to vary. I mean, here's 1 ring, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, on up. So the diameter of the ring, we can measure it on the graph paper. If you've done your drawing to proportion on the graph paper, then you can determine the maximum diameter. And so here, if we do ring G, which is like part way up, we measure the diameter, and since it's part of the structure that's going out like this, the maximum diameter is going to be here at the top of the ring rather than here at the bottom. So you measure the maximum diameter across, and it was 9.25 inches in this case. Maximum, and then I always add just a little bit because you're going to be taking some off anyway. So if I calculate, I put out 9.25 inches.
How much do you add as extra? A quarter inch?
Yeah, quarter. It
Size?
depends. It depends on the size. If it's a small one or large. Yeah. Okay, so you determine the maximum diameter of each ring. That's the first step. Okay. Now, when I was growing up, mathematics was not my favorite subject. Okay. Mathematics was not my favorite subject. Algebra, calculus, trigonometry, I went through, but I didn't like it. But geometry, for some reason, geometry appealed to me. And as you'll see, there's a lot of geometry here. So algebra, trigonometry, calculus was not my, but geometry, yeah, that appealed. And now I can see why I like segmented wood turning, because it involves some of this. So, okay, so you determine the maximum diameter of each ring. Then you have to calculate the circumference of the ring. So, here in the first column, for each of the rings, I put the diameter, then the circumference. Well, the circumference is the diameter times pi, or 3.14. So when you do that, couple of examples, the diameter times pi, and then you put it down. So here the diameter was 9.25, the circumference 29.1. Okay. Then you need to decide how many segments you're going to put into the ring. Well, you can do any number of segments. I, kind of as default, I like either 8 or 16. That's the one I use. Some people, if you're doing a large thing with a lot of small, you could go up to 100, per ring. But I do about 8 or 12 typically. So when you decide on the number of segments per ring, and you can see here I've done on the bottom, because it's the base and they're solid, I did 4 segments per ring. Up here in the neck, which is fairly thin, I did 8 segments per ring. And then by default, on all the rest, 16 segments per ring. Okay. Then you have to calculate the length of each segment. And the length is that part. And you calculate the length by taking the circumference and divided by the number of segments. So you've got the circumference here, 29.1 inches for ring G. If there's 16 segments, 29 divided by 16 gives you that value. So you need to determine that for each ring. So we're getting a lot of math in here. Okay. Miter angle. You have to determine the miter angle, and the miter angle equals 360 degrees divided by the number of segments divided by 2. Here the miter angle, for this is for 8 segments. Here for 16, for example, 360 degrees divided by 16 segments divided by 2 would give you 11.25 degrees. So each miter angle, so the miter angle here and the miter angle here would be 11.25 degrees for 16 segments. For 8 segments, it would be 360 divided by 8 divided by 2 would be 22.5 degrees for each one. 22.5 plus.
These are going to be equally standard. It doesn't matter what size.
Yeah, yeah, it's standard. So 22.5 on the 2 would be 45 degrees together.
You don't have a printout of these calculations, do
If you don't want to do the calculations,
I don't mind doing the calculations.
okay,
Just remember.
yeah, yeah,
I think there are charts.
yeah, I'll show you a chart in a minute.
Charts that have it.
Yeah, there are charts, but, yeah, just do it on your phone or something. Anyway, then after you have done all of that, get the miter angle, then you need to determine the width. And that's, at this angle, the width. And the width depends on where in the vessel that it is and whether the sides are vertical or sloping. So if it is, let's say for this one, if we're talking about this vertical space up here, and you want to make your wall thickness like 3/8 of an inch, then it would be 3/8 of an inch plus a little extra that you can take off. But if you're down here, the width is going to be a little greater because you have a difference between the upper part and the lower part. It has to be able to accommodate both. Here is the most extreme example right here, where it's at the bottom of the ring, it's all the way out to here, but then at the top of the ring on the inside, it's all the way over here. So the width is much greater. So you have to go through and just make a column here with the width, and just always add a little extra because you're going to be taking it off anyway.
The big one, you have to go by the widest point on that.
Yes, exactly, yeah. Okay. And then if you want to include a feature ring, we'll be talking about feature rings in a minute. That would be something like these or these, whatever. You have to, ahead of time, determine and work out the details of how you're going to put together the feature ring. So all of this has to be done before you even pick up your wood and get started. So all of this, very different from just getting a log and putting it on the lathe and getting to work. For charts, if you want to skip doing many of the calculations, you can look at a simple chart like this. Here's a chart for determining the length. So that's one of the dimensions, the length. So for example, here, the length here, ring G, let's see, we calculated the length as 1.82 inches. If I put it on here, it was 1.82 inches. The diameter was 9.25. So if we come over here, the diameter, okay, there's 9.25 for this column. How many segments? 16 is right there. So you follow this 16 over here, and you get 1.84. I calculated 1.82, and then a little extra you add. So you don't have to do the calculations. You can just go to a table like this. And I think there might be some in the books that I have, and you can probably find them online as well. So in lieu of calculating. Okay, well let's now get down to the nitty-gritty. We're going to be cutting the strips on a table saw. Now how I do it may be very different from how the other segmented wood turners do it. There's more than one way to skin a cat, okay, and to make segmented wood turning. So I do mine on a table saw. The length and width of each strip will be determined by your calculation. So here are some strips that I cut. This is a board that hasn't been cut yet, but here are some strips. The width, this is the width. And we'll determine the length as we get onto the lathe. This is the turning. This is the drawing of the turning that I'll be showing in the next few slides. It's this guy here. So this is the graph drawing of the piece that we're going to be showing in the next few slides. Rather than do this one, which is be much more complicated. So this one I'll show in the next couple of slides here. Okay. So what we do on here's my table saw, miter gauge, cutting. So when you're dealing with segmented wood turning, one piece might have 500, 800 individual pieces. It all depends. And you have to cut each one very precisely to get them all to fit together without gaps and glue oozing out and stuff. So what I have a miter gauge, and I'm doing 16 segments, so I have to set the miter gauge to 11.25 degrees. Okay. I can't find a miter gauge that does precisely 11.25 degrees. So I just get it as close as I can, set it. And here I have one of the strips of wood. The width is already determined. The length is going to be the distance here. Now, those of you who use table saws, don't cringe. I didn't actually make the cut like this. I put a little stop, normally a stop back here to get the exact length that I want, and then I move it forward. But for photographing, to make it simple, I just have it stuck in here with the power saw turned off. But here it is, and I'm cutting. I have it set at 11.25 degrees, and cutting the angle down. And as I cut the segments, I put all of the segments for one particular ring in one bowl, and then I have another bowl and another. So I choose the correct angle, the length for each segment. And then as I do this, I typically flip the segment, flip the strip over after each cut. So I can flip it, cut, and then cut two, and then take this, cut that one, flip it over, cut again, flip it again, keep flipping it over and over. And that way it saves a lot of wood, because here's segment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, with very little loss of wood. If you're dealing...
Do you shut the saw off each time, or won't that segment get caught in those
Okay,
teeth
no,
and fly back?
that's what I was just trying to explain. I did this for photographic purposes. If I push this on through, it would come flying out, as you know. But what I do normally is have the wood back here, and then I have a block of wood fixed to here. So this arm is over further, so it doesn't fly out. No, but that's good observance. Yeah. So I typically do it this way, which saves a lot of wood. If I have a piece of wood that has a particular figure in it that needs to be on the outside and can only be seen from this angle, then I would have to do it as is shown here, and then these would all be waste pieces in between. But I very seldom have wood that I'm doing that with.
Why wouldn't you just make two rings at one time and do it that way to make the grain match?
Make
Rather
two.
than waste it? Because you could be wasted 50%.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, you would have.
And I asked that as a question. I'm not being a smart.
Okay, no. Yeah, well, the part that's going to be on the outside that you see here is the broad part. So that would be, here, and then here, and here, and here. And if you're trying to if you have a piece of wood that you only want to be seen from this side, it would be here, here, here.
You want to look like a
It's
uniform
green
piece of
mesh.
wood all the way
If you wanted
around.
uniform all the way
You would have to do
around.
it like that.
Yeah, you could separate them even further and have one ring that was this way and then the other. Yeah.
Too far apart.
Mhm. Yeah, so you could, but this is what most people do. I'm sure most of the turners do it this way, and this is what I typically do. Like here, this is
I don't
Yeah.
know enough of this
Flip-
to ask
flipped
an
over.
intelligent
Yeah.
question.
That's a good question. That's a good question.
Yeah, no, good question.
That was-
Okay, and then for the base, I typically, like I'm sure the rest of you do, attach a waist block to a face plate to go on the lathe, and then I glue the base onto the waist block. And the base, as you know, there are a number of possibilities. It can be one solid piece, not necessarily the best idea, or it can be segmented on that urn, the base. I think the base is 4 pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4 on it. So on this one, it's just one piece, and it's held up well for 10 years or so.
I just wanted to ask everybody who's made segmented, if you put a solid piece on the bottom, has anybody ever experienced a failure?
I've done it both ways, and I've experienced failures both ways.
Because I made a lot of them, and I normally put a solid piece on the bottom, but I have never experienced a failure yet.
Yeah.
I haven't either. 100% of mine is solid. 100% of mine is solid.
Oh, yeah. This is solid, and it's done fine.
Segmented, depending upon the piece, it can look different if it's solid versus segmented, but.
Yeah.
I think
I
your
probably-
first ring with all the glue in it kind of holds that bottom piece from a lot of movement. So you don't get as much movement.
Yeah, I've done all of that. I've done solid, I've done segmented. I've even had a floating disc in there, round, and then a floating, and they all seem to work.
Mine's pretty simple, excuse me. After making all them rings, throw a flat one on there and get on with it.
Yeah, that's the easiest. But if you're doing four is comes pretty fast. Okay, so after cutting out all the strips, sometimes I sand the segments. They often don't need sanding, but if they do, I have a disc sander with a jig. This is for 16 pieces with a particular angle, and I just put them in, just tap it to the sandpaper if necessary. Occasionally you'll get a little bit of fuzz or something on there. You just need to get that out of the way before you would try to glue it. That seldom happens anymore. So measure the length, make sure it's within the ballpark of what you want. No matter if you take all of the 16 pieces, with your miter gauge, it may be off by 1/4 of a degree, but 1/4 of a degree times the 2 miters times 16 adds up, and you put them all together, and these are all tight down here, but you have gaps. And when I started out, the DVD that I was doing at that time showed you put them all together, dry like that, and then if you've got a gap, you mark it with a pencil, and then you take those apart and you sand it and put them back together. I've learned that's not the best way to do it. You can glue them all at once like that. It takes a lot of effort to get it precise. Or another way to do it, Malcolm Tibbetts, you just take half of the segments, glue them together, take the other half, glue them together, and then put a spacer in between, which will, if the two pieces there are like this or that, they won't be glued together. They'll have a spacer. Let that all dry, take it out, and then you've got two halves like this, and you can just put them on the sandpaper disc perfectly flat and sand them down and then glue them together. Okay. Close.
Don,
Yeah.
one comment that you, back one slide. What he is doing here is so important if you are first doing this. Do not glue your rings together. Put them in a clamp, hold them up to light, because if you put the glue on them first and then clamp them, the glue, when it's wet, it covers up that hole, so you can't tell. So that when it dries, you don't necessarily know there's a gap.
Yep.
So always, if you're first starting this, put your rings together in a clamp without glue, and then you'll know for sure if you have a good flat ring or not.
Yeah. Very, very good point.
How do you, what do you clamp them with? You bet have, what do you clamp them with?
Well, I don't do this anymore, so let me get to the next couple of slides, and I'll show you how I go about it, which I can't remember where I learned this, but it actually works much better. What I do is, I think this might be from, Malcolm Tibbetts. Lay the pieces out and then just glue them together two at a time. So let me pass that around. That's one. And then here, in the case of two of them glued together. And what I do is just take two individual pieces, put some glue on like that, rub them together, and then lay them on a flat surface, rub them, line them up, and then just set them aside to dry. And here, 16 pieces I've put together into pairs. So here are two, and it's like these, and well, okay, more going around. Then what I'll often do is maybe put them on the sander with a jig, because here are two of 16 together, which is equivalent to an 8 segment. So I'll just put it into the jig, 8 segment, just tap it on the sander. Sometimes, although you don't even need to do that. But here are two of them I'll put together into pairs, and once those are dry, then you put the two pairs together to make 4 like this, and let them dry. And when you've got 16 and you've got 4 of them, it should form right angle, and so then I get those 4, put them together, make 2 halves. So here are the 2 halves at this point. And at this point, then, I just put them on the sander, push them up and get them perfectly sanded smooth, and hold them up, make sure I don't see any light in there, and then glue them together. And I don't use these clamps, the pipe clamps. I used to. I do on larger pieces, I'll clamp them, but you put them together like this. You can put a rubber band around it, or just lay it down, and often the adhesive properties of the glue will keep it together. So let me pass a couple of these around.
Cause it's a fighting 16 of them in a radiator clamp.
I'm sorry?
It's a fighting 16 of them in a radiator clamp.
You've done it before, yes. Yes, it is. Yeah.
If you put veneer between the segments, does that change your calculations at all?
Putting the glue.
No, veneer. A piece of veneer.
Oh, veneer. The veneer, well, let me get to the veneer. I'll be showing this in a minute. You noticed the veneer on this? Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, the veneer is very thin. Okay, so once I have the rings assembled, and like, here are the rings. When they come out, let me find one. Yeah, the rings, glue is squeezing out between the pieces and so on. So let me just pass these around while I'm talking. What I do, we need, when you glue the segments together, they all have to be flat, and we've just taken care of that. Now, when we glue the rings together, the face of the rings that are being glued together also have to be perfectly flat. So how I do that, this is an MDF board, and I just glue the ring once it's together. You can feel how it's a little rough on the surface, so I wouldn't be able to put two of those together. So I need to have perfectly smooth, flat surface. So I put like 3 or 4 drops of CA glue on here, stick it onto the MDF board, dries in a few seconds, and then I want to smooth this off. Now, I'll often just get a little bowl gouge or something, just very gently touch it as it's going around, and then a block of sandpaper on a board to flatten it. Then, to make sure that it's flat, I'll put a straight edge across, because it needs to be flat, not only from here to here flat and here to here flat, but flat from here to here. So I take this, put it across, and then put a light underneath, and you can see here that there's a little bit of light shining through here. So it may be flat from here to here, but it's not flat all the way across. So I need to take a little bit off of the inner edge. So I sand it some more until I don't see any light underneath. And then I just flip this off, and the top side is smooth and ready to go.
So if you have a lot of rings, could you take an MDF board and then glue them all to that ring and slide it through a planer?
Yeah,
Drum sander.
yeah,
I mean,
drum
you're doing a
sander.
lot. That probably saves a lot of time.
Yeah, but you're just taking a very little bit off, as you could feel in that piece. I guess you could.
You just,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
a lot of rings.
I did green, you put a planer, I think, because of the grain pattern, it might
Yeah.
crack them, but a drum sander would probably work, yeah.
Yeah.
How do you get your first shot smooth?
Mhm.
Don't ever put rings through a planer.
Yeah.
Now,
You can't
drum
put-
sander is fine, but a planer,
No, you can't put rings through a planer. You can only put them halfway through a planer.
I'm glad I've never tried. Yes.
don't ask me how I know.
You saw it.
It went in as a ring, but it came out in pieces.
I would have
Segments again, right? Yeah.
Rib patterns?
Well, then, with an end grain cutting board, you can put, slave pieces on the edge, or sacrificial pieces on the edge, so it doesn't matter.
No, I
You can't do
understand.
that with a ring, so
Right.
drum sander is definitely the way to go, if you have it available.
How do you get your first side flat? Because when you come out of a ring, load them up, you can have 2 uneven sides.
I get one side flat.
How do you do that? That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, that's what I was just showing here. Either I'll get a scraper or we'll just gently do the surface, and then this is a sanding board, a flat board.
First one done.
Okay, this is the first. This is the first one. Yeah.
You got one rough side against the MDF.
Yeah, the rough side is against the BDF. That I'll do later, but the top side, okay, this, once I get that smooth, okay, then I'll take that smooth side and glue it to the base. The base I've sanded smooth. This is a waist block, and then the base, and then I have the smooth side of what we just sanded, and glue that on there, let the glue dry. Then once that is dry, I take the whole thing off, put it on the lathe, and then do the same thing to the other side that had been glued previously to that ring, and then I'm just doing it, just hip, flip, 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 flip. Yeah,
Do you stack them all up and then clamp them, or do you just put one on?
I do it one at a time.
You put one on, then dry, put the next one on?
Yeah. So you spend most of your time waiting for glue to dry.
Do you clamp the 2 feet, do you clamp each one on, or just hold it like you did the little segment?
Yeah, this is a jig that I had made early on. I seldom use this anymore because I just put the pieces together, rub them until the glue kind of fit, and make sure that they're centered, and then I'll just lay a brick on top. Yeah.
Your MDF board, you had
Uh-huh.
a slide or 2 back with the concentric rings on it. Now, if you're gluing to that, aren't you chewing up the surface every time you pop one off? And then
Oh, yeah.
you have to keep redressing it?
Have to keep,
Okay.
have to keep sanding it each time, yeah. I guess I could use something other than MDF, but.
Well, no, I was
it's-
just curious, because it seems, even if you put 4 drops of glue on it, you're still gonna start chewing it up as you're popping it.
Yeah, you do, you just keep,
So after when you do the one side and you flip it around, you're putting glue on it, you have to go back and sand that glue on?
oh, yeah, so each, you do one side, and then you glue that side to the previous ring, and then you put that in the lathe, and then, well, here, I think maybe the next slide might, yeah, okay, here we go. Here I've got, several rings done, and in fact, on this piece, you can see the 4 drops, where the 4 drops of glue were. So when I have gotten that glued on, now I would take this and then sand it, smooth it to get the side before I'm able to put on the next ring.
Oh, so you glue it to the piece and then you put it back on?
Yeah.
the chuck.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, just, one, this, and that. Yeah. So here I've got, what is this? The base plus 1, 2, 3, 4 rings. I had a veneer accent ring that I decided to add to each one. When I pass this around, you'll notice the veneer. It's a double veneer. I put 2 pieces of veneer, black and maple, I think ebony and maple, put them together on the top and the bottom of the accent ring. And just gluing, flattening, gluing, flattening, gluing, flattening. Not very exciting, but it builds up. Now, one advantage that we have over doing a solid piece, if this had been made from a solid piece of wood, the opening is the size of my finger, Doing the outside is easy. Doing the inside, if it was like this, is a bit of a challenge. It's doable, but a bit of a challenge. Here you have the option of doing the inside and the outside when it's half assembled. So at this point, I would be able to go inside, smooth it out, smooth the outside, at the same time get the thickness that I wanted. And then here you can see I've gotten it to this point where I've done up to the neck. And here I was putting on the ring for the neck, and then veneer, and then the other piece of the neck, gluing them all together. And that would be this piece, the veneer, and the top piece. So I put them on and then take the bowl gouge or the spindle gouge and get it all out. And then when I'm ready, just take it off the block. Yeah.
So I understood where you said that when you're halfway through, you can smooth off the inside.
Uh-huh.
So now you put the next layer on,
Uh-huh.
and do you do the inside kind of
Mhm.
underneath?
Yeah,
Then
well,
the next layer, you do it
the
again.
inside would just narrow it by like 1 inch. You've still got a big gap.
Right.
So you could do the inside fairly easily. And then you do the next one, it's a bit more of a challenge, but you don't have to go very deep.
So is it possible to do this in half? So you have in a sense, you start from both ends, build to the middle.
Yes.
You hollow out both sides, and the last thing you glue together is right in the middle,
Mhm.
right? You could do that as well?
That's how I did this. I'll be showing some examples of this in a couple of minutes. And what I did for this one, I did the bottom as one part. I did this top as another part, and then this as one part, and this as one part. And then put them all together. So yeah, it all depends on the piece. And
So, one final question.
Yeah.
When you are not doing that,
Uh-huh.
you have the width that you're gluing the entire width.
Mhm.
But when you've got it down to the final dimension, you have a much narrower glue pad there between the two parts you're putting together, because it's already thinned down.
Right.
Does that matter?
Yeah, you have to take that into account. You can leave it a little bit. You can thin it out, halfway up, and then leave it a little bit thicker there as you're gluing it on. In fact, that's a good idea because it gives you more surface area for adhesion. So yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
What it comes down to is that Don can show you the way he does it. I can show you the way I did it.
Mhm.
He can show you the way he does it. And you have to find what you're comfortable with.
Exactly.
I turn the inside first. I don't touch the outside until I have it built. But that's because my mentor taught me the way he did it. So that's just the way that I'm comfortable with. But the reality of the situation is, if you're comfortable putting a ring on and then turning the inside and the outside, and then putting a ring on and then continuing that path, then that's the way you do it. So any way will work as long as you're safe.
Mhm.
Now, all these rings, when you usually make them, they're a little bit, let's call it, not concentric, it's a little
Yeah.
bit egg-shaped, let's almost say.
Mhm.
And I notice when you're putting them together and you start building up, how do you keep them so that you don't start progressively coming off? Because I always take my previous ring and I turn it and I make sure it's totally round before I put on the next ring. So I know I'm going against something that's definitely round. But I seen you were just stacking them up
Mhm.
as the segments there. So it looks like you could be getting off, progressively off with it.
Well, this is just, the base plus 1, 2, 3 segments.
Yeah.
If I was doing a lot of segments, that would become an issue. you're right. But with just relatively few segments like I have there, I've never had a problem with that.
So he's asking about finding the center when you're gluing the next ring on? And is that done by matching up the segments, or?
Well, when I'm doing, like here are two 16, I would put these together and then line them up so that, you know, each segment was in the middle, the line was in the middle of the previous one, and just put it on and try to get it, you know, as close as I can. And I've got enough, I add a little bit of extra width, as I mentioned before, to this, so that if it is a little bit off, then, you know, I just,
Yeah, I mean, if you're
Yeah.
a little bit off, then you just reshape it like you would a bowl.
Yeah.
And it should eventually center itself, and it should come back to round.
yeah.
If you have enough active plate.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Okay, well, let me go ahead. I want to talk a little bit about feature rings. We've got, what, 15 minutes? Okay, I may have to skip some at the end, but, okay, feature rings, not everything has to have a feature ring, but you know, most of mine do. Here's one that didn't have a feature ring. It was a Greek amphora, but I had made a feature holder for it, like waves, where the amphora had been spilled over a sinking boat into the Mediterranean. Then here, let me take a few minutes and focus on the Greek key ring here and how I went about making that. The Greek, I'll go ahead and pass this around so you can look at it as I'm doing the Greek key. Here, you can see here's one of the Greek keys enlarged. So I have 16 of these. So I have 16 of these going around, and each one, as you can see, is made up of a number of pieces of, what is this? Brazilian cherry and maple. Okay. So what I had to do here, I made, again, graph paper, graphing each piece. And when you're doing something, especially something this large, you want all of the grain to be going in the same direction because as the wood expands, you don't, when you're building a table or something you're putting together, you don't want wood to be expanding in one direction, it'll crack. So we want all of these to be going in the same direction. So here, for example, this piece, the grain is going in this direction. Here it's going longitudinally, longitudinally, longitudinally. But then here it's going crosswise. The grain's going this way, this way, this way. And then same with the maples, going crossways, longitudinally, cross longitudinally. So I had to, as I was doing these, keep track of which ones were being cut longitudinally and which ones were being cut cross. So that's what all these little pockets of holders, each one is in a labeled for a particular pattern so that I got them all going in the same direction. And then I put them together. So here I would glue two together and then sand them to get them the right dimension, and then glue another two to them like here, get all of these, and then once these were together, assemble them into, yeah, and just,
Did you make the pattern on a long strip and then cut segments as opposed to making each one?
I guess you could do that, sure.
'Cause
Yeah,
when
but-
when you make cutting boards, you make patterns in a long strip.
Mhm.
You cut the strip.
Yeah, but you would still have to be, careful of the direction of the
Right,
grain for each one. Sure, yeah, that's another way of doing it. Might have been easier, I don't know. But then, get all of the blocks together. Here's a block. I'll pass that around. Then once you get them all together, then you have to make the miter angle. And that block, when I'm doing 16 of them and they're this complicated, I always do 17 just in case. And that's the one where I made the mistake of putting the miter angle, instead of the miter angle going this way, it went this way. And you can't just flip it around. I tried it with the Greek symbol, it doesn't work.
In front of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, it won't, it's going into the disc, it's not going on. That's good, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so then once I get all of them, I made that ring. So that part I made there, and you can see. So I made that separately and then turned all of that separately, like I mentioned.
Because of the height of those,
Uh-huh.
do you cut the miter by tilting your table saw blade, or do you really cut those standing up, as it were?
No, I laid them down and did the table, so I set it for 11.2.
Much simpler way to cut it.
Yes, yeah. And then if it was a little bit off, I sanded it, in a jig. So. Okay, then let me just finish. I did some scallops, and I hadn't planned on doing scallops, but something was going through my mind, and I don't know if you've ever been kind of pondering something, and then you wake up in the middle of the night and an aha moment, how to make the scallop. So I turned all of this part of it separately, and the way I did that, just very quickly, making the scallops, I made like a sandwich, and here I'll pass a few of these test pieces around. Made a sandwich with maple and then a piece of ebony and then another piece of maple. So it's like a sandwich. And then I figured, well, if I remove what I did, I put it on an oscillating disc sander with about a 2-inch disc and sand it out for each piece. I made a jig that moved this in at a 20-degree angle, and I just did that out. And if you kind of think about doing the geometry on this, as you go deeper in the middle and not as deep on each end, it's going to create a scallop image. And I think, wow, that's great. Well, after doing that, okay, here's another one where I did the scallops like this. It's that one over here. And here the scallops come down without having to put it on an oscillating disc sander, because I thought, well, if you can do it that way, how about doing it just the opposite? And instead of putting the strip straight up and down, how about you rotate the strip 20 degrees, and then as you are curving it on a narrow part, it's going to do the same thing in reverse. And sure enough, it did. Here's a piece I did a long time ago. The first one I did with that scallop. Okay, porthole. On this one, I've done a number of these with portholes. It gives it a different effect and pass. And we're getting right near the end, so that'll be the last piece I think I'll pass around. But that's another thing you can do with segmented wood turning. Here I've done a number of urns and put in the Greek symbol shu, which is the symbol for longevity, which is kind of ironic on an urn. So I put the longevity and put that in. Maybe let me go ahead and I'll pass that around. take the lid off. Yeah, so that's another feature, not a feature ring, but another feature you can add in. Here's one I did for Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital, Beads of Courage thing, same thing, longevity for children going through cancer treatment. And then here are a few other features that I've done, some of them shown up here, some I brought in before for show and tell. Open segments. Now, I haven't done any open segments. This is a friend of mine back in Baltimore did a number of open segments. How many of you have done open segment? Okay, so you're well experienced with that. It just, it's a challenge. I'm going to give it a try. It's another nice feature. And then here are another few simple things here. This is just a whole block of maple that I turned and then carved. Where is the segmented turning? It's just the ring. I just put that one ring on as an accent. Here's a burl. I forget the name of the wood, but where is the segmented turning? It's this black ring of ebony, 16 segments, pencil thin little ring that goes around, nice accent. There's another one. The segmented turning is just that ring right there. Finally, staves. This is another version of segmented turning where you, instead of having a lot of rings that you put together, you just have one long stave, but still you've got the miter, angle, and everything that goes together, and that's this guy here. And it's another option. And, okay, now these I did not do. This is Malcolm Tibbetts who did these. Segmented ribbons, this is called, and this is like 2 or 3 feet high. Segmented, and you just turn, it's like you're turning a bowl, and then you cut it in half, and you take the 2 halves and you reassemble them, but you turn it over. So like here's this half, and then here's the other half, and then another bowl, and then, clever. Just what you can do with segmented turning. The chess table and the chairs, these are real full-size chairs that you can sit on and do something just completely different. And then in conclusion, while it may be true that no one in their right mind does segmented turning, who cares? It can be very rewarding, and if you just want to get into it in a tiny degree, here is from Ray Allen's book. Here are 3 bowls that he turned. I have yet to try something like that. But if you don't want to try a tiny bowl, perhaps you want to go in full size. Here is Ray Allen sanding the inside of one of his larger balls. Yes. So you can see nobody in their right mind, but okay, thank you all.